Yeah, hello everyone. Oh wait, David wants to make an appearance. No one's here yet. I initially started live streaming like 15 minutes ago, but then 1 minute in, before I had even read one word, I knocked over a massive 16-ounce, maybe even more, thing of coffee, and so then David helped me clean it up.
It was a tidal wave.
And then I opened the book. Oh wait, look at that. The time just started.
Wow.
Huh. Anyway, then I opened the book and I was like, wait a second, I feel like I need to refresh my knowledge of New York City mayors. So I took some notes, and I'll probably pull it out once more people are here, because I feel like it'll be fun if people say stuff in the chat. David, we've gotten to the part in the book, well, page 353, but LaGuardia. We're about to learn about Fiorello LaGuardia.
Of airport fame.
Of U.S. House of Representatives fame.
Whoa.
He was a mayor for 12 years, which is a long time to be the mayor.
It's pretty long to me.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks for helping me clean up.
Happy reading.
Okay. LaGuardia, a nominal Republican, too liberal for most Republicans, had already lunged for the prize twice before, of prizes being the mayor. In 1921, president of the Board of Aldermen, he had sought the nomination from the Fusion Committee, of which Moses was secretary. But the reformers had turned instead to Henry Curran, one of their own. And when LaGuardia ran against Curran in the Republican primary, he had failed to carry a single borough. In 1929, the Little Flower, I don't know who the Little Flower is, had received the Republican nomination, and the only remarkable aspect of his campaign against Jimmy Walker, then at the height of his popularity, was the size of his defeat. Failing to carry a single assembly district, LaGuardia received only 367,675 votes to Walker's 867,522. The Little Flower must be Fiorello LaGuardia. Then in 1932, after 5 terms as congressman from Latin East Harlem, where he had constructed an aptly named personal Italian-American political machine, the Giboni Apes, LaGuardia had been defeated by a Tammany hack. In 1932, it was just J.P. O'Brien who became the mayor for 1 year. And he was the one where everyone was like, yeah, he's not really that compelling. He's kind of not that smart. And so he is probably the Tammany hack that's being referred to. Out of a job at the age of 50, branded a loser, only by winning the mayoralty could he resuscitate a political career that seemed to be gasping out its last breath. LaGuardia possessed qualifications for making the run beyond the fact that, half Jewish and half Italian, married first to a Catholic and then to a Lutheran of German descent, himself a Mason and an Episcopalian, he was practically a balanced ticket all by himself. Campaigning for mayor in 1929, he had made charges. Many of the city's magistrates were corrupt, except for Al Smith. Quote, "There isn't a Tammany politician that would care to have his bank account examined." That the city had thought exaggerated until the Seabury investigations, which began just a month after the election, had proved that most of them were understatements. As the Tin Box Parade swung into full stride, and the Tin Box Parade is the Seabury investigations of the Tammany politicians being really corrupt, mostly just Jimmy Walker, the mayor, who also was the guy who, I'm 99% sure he's the guy from a few chapters ago who made his office in the Central Park Casino. Big shock that he was very corrupt. As that swung into full stride, the Times commented that LaGuardia was the only man with the right to stand up in New York City today and say, "I told you so." But LaGuardia, son of immigrants, raised in tenements, possessor of neither a high school nor an undergraduate college degree, he had earned an LLB from NYU Law School by attending classes, mostly in the evening from 1907 to 1910. That was a footnote. He was from a different background than the reformers, and this was not an unimportant point with them. The members of the Fusion Conference Committee and much of that segment of New York for which the committee spoke were, as one of LaGuardia's biographers put it, educated at the best colleges, financially secure, eminent in the professions and business, and primarily old stock American Protestant, but also significantly Jewish. The Fusionists came, in short, from Gotham's gentry. Hello, welcome. We're talking about Fiorello LaGuardia, who's about to become the mayor in 1933. Spoiler. The attitude of many of them was, if not bigoted, at least parochial. They preferred one of their own kind as mayor, or at least a type more like themselves than the swarthy little Italian American. LaGuardia's personal style was screaming, ranting, fist-shaking, and more than a little irresponsible. Learning that a family had been burned to death while the mother tried unsuccessfully to telephone the fire department, he insinuated that the telephone company was guilty of murder. Testifying before a legislative committee on rent controls, he said, "I come not to praise the landlord, but to bury him." These men who distrusted excess distrusted him. And he did not hesitate to play melting pot politics, to wave the bloody flag, to appeal in one of the 7 languages in which he could harangue an audience. 7 languages? That is a Fiorello LaGuardia, Italian, English, obviously, and he had a German wife, so maybe, but I am going to have to look that up later. He could harangue audiences. He did not hesitate to play melting pot politics, to wave the bloody flag, to appeal in one of the 7 languages in which he could harangue an audience to the insecurities, resentments, and prejudices of the ethnic groups in the immigrant district he represented in Congress. "I can out-demagogue the best of demagogues," he told one aide. "I invented the low blow," he boasted to another. His naked ambition for high office, his cockiness, truculence, and violent temper while he was president of the Board of Aldermen, Curran once had to restrain him physically from striking the city comptroller, repelled them. Yes, it's LaGuardia of airport fame. I'm so excited. Also, okay, I took some notes about New York City mayors as a little crash course. Wow, Italian, German, Yiddish, and Croatian. How did he learn the Croatian? That's kind of amazing. Okay, I don't know if you need this, but I needed this, and so I'm going to give you a tiny crash course on the mayors that have been relevant so far in the book, because I feel like we talked about the governors a lot, and then I would get mixed up on I needed a little refresher on the mayors. Okay, so whenever we talk about J.P. Mitchell, John Perroy Mitchell, he was the mayor from 1914 to 17, and he was the boy mayor, and people basically thought that he was kind of a prick. Like, he was Irish because all the people in power were. He was a lawyer, and he was all about, like, he was kind of hoity-toity, very educated. He was a Republican. And the crazy thing about John Perroy Mitchell, the boy mayor, is that here's the part that I don't think they even said in the book, or at least not yet. After he left office in 1917, he joined the Air Service because it was pre-Air Force, but it was essentially the Air Force. And guess how he died? He fell out of the plane. He fell out of the plane, and they found his body in a marsh in, like, Louisiana. That's how he died. It wasn't the plane crash. His body fell out of the plane. So that was one New York City mayor. Then the next New York City mayor, who we've talked about a lot, is Red Mike Hylan, who was the mayor from 1918 to 1925. And he was Irish. His dad was from Ulster. They were all Irish for a while, all the mayors. He loved trains, and he just showed up in New York one day from upstate. He saw people working on the train and was like, "Can I have a job here?" And they were like, "Sure." He somehow became a lawyer, and Woodrow Wilson was his professor. And then he just like, I don't know, became tight with Tammany, and he became the mayor for literally 7 years. And people thought of him as kind of like a dumb guy. He just like loved the trains. He was the mayor. He was really bad at giving speeches. And one time they wrote a speech for him, and it was like, they wanted to end with this line, like the spirit of 1776, but he botched it. He was like the spirit of 1776. And so then the very first New Yorker magazine ever in 1925, they had an article that kind of parodied how bad he is at speaking by calling him Joan F. Hyland instead of John F. Hyland, which is the same. Okay, so then after that, so we go for, there's two Irish guys, and both of them are not very compelling. One of them is a little bit too cerebral. The other one is not cerebral enough. Then we get Jimmy Walker, and he's the guy that is like ritzy. His office is in the casino. He's called Bo James. He was the mayor from 1926 to 1932. He a big Tammany guy. If you look up his picture, he looks like John Hamm, honestly. Like he's a great jawline. I get it. He had a wife, but he also had many girlfriends, and a lot of them were movie stars. He was living a life that, like, it makes sense that his life was made into movies later. His dad was like, "You need to become a lawyer." So he went to NYU Law, but he was like, "Dad, my true love is songwriting." And so then he wrote a song, and it kind of went big. That was the one that was like, "Will you still love me in December like you do in March?" or something like that. Or like you do in May. Okay, so he had his little songwriter moment, but then he went back to being a lawyer, and then he became the mayor with Tammany's support, and he was the ritzy one with clothes, and he loved speakeasies, and he hated prohibition, and he was tight with Al Smith because both of them love partying. And when the Seabury investigation happened and uncovered all of his scandals with Tammany Hall, but especially with him and how he was taking bribes and a lot of city money, he fled to Europe. And then when he came back, he took a job as the head of a record company called Majestic Records. And he even had his own radio show. Kind of a happy ending. I think the whole time, I mean, there's probably a lot of problems that happened in New York in the 1920s and 30s that would not have happened if he simply had a podcast like he always wanted to have, a radio show, I guess. Okay, so then it was like J.P. O'Brien really briefly because Jimmy Walker, scandal, fled to Europe. So then we had the random guy, J.P. O'Brien, just filling in. And then it brings us to the election where we are now. I hope that wasn't an okay interruption. And mostly I just wanted to look that up for myself so I could keep it all straight. Jimmy Walker, Bo James is the funnest one. His life actually has been made into so many movies. He where is he? Jimmy Walker. This is all just from Wikipedia. But he is in the 1983 Woody Allen film Zelig. He's a romanticized version of his life was in the 1957 film Bo James starring Bob Hope. There's a biography. There's a song by Dean Martin simply titled Bo James. There was a stage musical called Jimmy that was about him on Broadway. And then there was a 2021 off-Broadway play called Tammany Hall that depicted him. And there was a novel in 2000. He's just like, there's just so many. His life was a movie. Okay. Anyway, I'm so glad that you enjoyed the crash course. I hope it was helpful. Anyway, so now we're going back to LaGuardia. Furthermore, although the reformers considered themselves liberals, their definition of the term was decidedly pre-Depression, and LaGuardia was far too liberal for them. A New Dealer before the New Deal, he made a career for himself as the leader of the have-nots against the haves, and they were haves. His efforts in Congress might have made him, in his biographer's words, the plumed knight of organized labor. But organized labor, militant, aggressive organized labor, was not precisely what reformers had in mind when they spoke moist eyes of the working man. Moist-eyed. LaGuardia lashed out, moreover, at the city's businessmen who were Fusion's financial cornerstones, charging, without offering proof, that big property owners were receiving low assessments on their property. When, in 1929, he attempted to falsely persuade voters that he was a Fusion as well as Republican candidate, the Citizens Union replied with a statement characterizing him as an opportunistic, excitable, unpredictable radical. So he's just really liberal. Okay, that's exciting. Many reformers, LaGuardia's biographers say, were happy that his ouster from Congress had apparently put an end to an obnoxious career propelled by unstable and dangerous ambitions. The fact that in 1933, LaGuardia was the only professional Republican politician in the city who could dramatize both himself and an issue did not move them. Moreover, Republican leaders detested this Republican whom they considered a radical. They flatly refused to accept him. Seabury, while not committing himself, noted that LaGuardia was an excellent campaigner. The judge wanted to win. But every time LaGuardia's name was brought up, it was greeted with open hostility by most other members of the Fusion Conference Committee. Running out of other candidates, they began again to lean to Moses. Price asked him to reconsider his withdrawal. Seabury began pushing more strongly for LaGuardia, possibly because he saw him as the only remaining viable alternative to Moses. But on July 26, Price took an informal phone call of the Fusion Conference Committee. Took an informal telephone poll, not call, a poll, P-O-L-L. The vote was 18 for Moses, 5 for LaGuardia. Moses agreed to let Price present his name again. He felt that Seabury, confronted by the fait accompli of the nomination, would not split the movement and would back him. The Fusion leaders felt the same way. A meeting of the committee was scheduled for the following afternoon at the Lawyers Club, 115 Broadway, at 3 p.m. A room was reserved. Reporters were alerted that an important announcement would be made. Everything was in readiness to offer Moses the Fusion nomination for the mayor of the city of New York. As late as noon on July 27, Moses must have felt confident that he had it. But at noon on July 27, 3 hours before the meeting was to convene, Seabury invited Davidson to lunch at the Bankers Club and demanded the nomination for LaGuardia. When Davidson told him that the committee had decided to give it to Moses, Seabury struck the table with his clenched fist so hard that the dishes rattled loudly in the suddenly hushed dining room. "You sold out to Tammany Hall," the judge said. "I'll denounce you and everyone else. You sold out the movement to Tammany Hall." Leaving his guests at the table, he strode out of the dining room to the elevator. Davidson, remonstrating, followed, but Seabury in the elevator turned and said, "You sold out, goodbye." And the door shut in Davidson's face. Striding back to his office, which was located at 120 Broadway, next door, directly across from the Lawyers Club where the Fusion Committee was to meet, Seabury issued a statement broadly hinting that he would run another ticket. The Fusion leaders, realizing that they had miscalculated, began to search frantically for a new candidate. Moses, learning of these developments by telephone from Price, told him that he didn't want his name placed in the nomination. In an attempt to placate Seabury while not alienating the Republicans, who still refused to nominate LaGuardia, the committee nominated independent Democrat John F. O'Ryan, former member of the City Transit Commission. The reporters covering the Fusion meeting ran across Broadway to Seabury's office to learn his reaction. Seabury hardly knew of O'Ryan, and since he knew his ignorance was shared by the voters, he believed O'Ryan could not win. Seeing by now a tiger behind every bush, the judge told the reporters that this was the reason Orion had been nominated. So he's being like, wait, so Seabury's the judge who did the whole investigation into Tammany being corrupt, but it does not seem impartial in the way that judges typically are, because he just he's like convinced that everyone is Tammany. He's like, Orion must be Tammany. Okay, Tammany, he charged, had forced Republican leaders, some of whom have long been the owned and operated chattels of Tammany Hall, to nominate a weak candidate. Oh, okay. Orion withdrew for the sake of unity. This is such a shit show. A new Harmony Committee was formed. Harmony Committee. It included not only Seabury, but the one man who could match him in prestige among the reformers, Charles Culp C.C. Burlingham, who at 82 still had the gift of making men forget their differences and remember their common cause. When Seabury began to roar "sell out" during one Harmony Committee meeting, Burlingham said, "Sit down, Sam, sit down." While the other members goggled at hearing the bishop call by his first name, he sat down. And after midnight, on August 4, C.C. persuaded the committee members, with the exception of Price and Davidson, who held out for Moses to the last, to authorize Seabury to call a waiting LaGuardia and tell him the nomination was his. This is like high drama. New paragraph. The reform movement of New York City had wanted Robert Moses for mayor. Of all the influential reformers, only one had been firmly opposed to him. Given the almost certain success in 1933 of a fusion ticket headed by so popular a candidate, it is hardly an overstatement to say that only one man stood between Moses and the mayoralty, between Moses and supreme power in the city. But that man had stood fast at the last moment, as Moses must have felt the prize securing within his grasp. It was denied him. All right, next paragraph. During the first 2 months of the mayor campaign, which had been turned into a three-way race by the entry, with support from President Roosevelt, James A. Farley, and Bronx boss Edward J. Flynn of anti-Tammany Democrat Joseph V. McKee, Moses declined to participate. His visceral hatred of Roosevelt had been intensified by his philosophical antipathy to the president's social welfare policies, which he referred to in private as socialistic. And the liberal LaGuardia, who as a lame duck congressman had introduced in early 1933 several bills favored by the incoming administration, was identified in Moses's mind with the New Deal. It's interesting that LaGuardia was a Republican, and yet he's so progressive that both the Republicans and the Democrats don't really know what to do with him. I feel like there aren't really any people like that I can think of right now. Parties just change over time. But tough-minded reformer politician and key fusion strategist Paul Windells, believing in late October that LaGuardia's campaign was losing momentum and needed a lift, asked Raymond Ingersoll to ask Moses to endorse the Little Flower. The Little Flower is LaGuardia. Moses agreed. With less than 2 weeks remaining before Election Day, Moses suddenly abandoned his role as bystander, and his entry into the campaign had an impact even more dramatic than Windells had foreseen. For Moses's radio speeches and printed statements burst above the murk of the city's political battlefield like a Roman candle whose sparkle, coming from a shower of glittering sharp-pointed barbs, flung off by a graceful and witty malice, was both hard and brilliant. I need a little sip of water. I don't really know what this is. Yeah, that was not water. I don't know where. Oh, Pearl's actually here. I'll show her to you while I get water. This is Pearl. Girl, say hi to everyone while I get water. Okay. All right, let's see LaGuardia win. This is kind of exciting. Assailing Tammany and its mayors in a radio broadcast, Moses urged voters to remember the strange characters they have seen occupying the places of Judge Gaynor and John Peroy Mitchell in City Hall. Hyland is the former mayor. Hyland is the one that people thought was kind of dumb. Guess what his nickname was? The Ranting Bozo of Bushwick. Okay, so Moses is basically just like making fun of how bad all the other mayors have been to like make people want to elect LaGuardia. So he makes fun of the Ranting Bozo of Bushwick, Walker, half Beau Brummel, and half gutter snipe. I don't know let's see what a gutter snipe is. That feels like another good word. A scruffy and badly behaved child who spends most of their time on the street. Gutter snipe. I guess, now that I think about it, that's kind of what it sounds like, gutter snipe. Okay. And John P. O'Brien, a winded bull in the municipal china shop. Is it any wonder, Moses asked, that younger voters who could not remember a non-Tammany mayor must think of the great office of chief magistrate with derision and contempt? As for the Farley Flynn candidate, Moses said, he was a pious fraud whose attempt to portray himself as a reformer would forever be known in the city's history as the strange interlude of Holy Joe McKee. Electing McKee mayor and thereby giving power to Farley and Flynn would bring to City Hall only another kind of Tammany. Do you think, he asked, that the Currys, McCooeys, Farleys, and Flynns are in any essential respect different from the Murphys, McCooeys, McCabe's, and McCalls of the cartoons of a generation ago? Do you think that the McCooey of today, who is the last living link between these two dynasties, is not the same old McCooey of the early 1900s? Let the younger voters ask the older voters this question. There can be no doubt of the answer. All those references are totally lost on me. I do not know what he's talking about. Each of Moses' statements had its own sharp bite. The great statesman McKee, he said in one, is a synthetic character which never actually existed on sea or land, puffed up by the press and now in the process of deflation. There's a large amount of unfairness to the individual in this process, but in the end, it arrives at the truth. And each statement contained praise for LaGuardia, couched in a prose that had to it a ring that sounded all the clearer above the dull clangor that is political strife in New York. No one has ever questioned your independence, Moses told the little flower in a public statement. You have no strings on you. You are not engaged in an obscure struggle for the control of a rotten political machine. You are free to work for New York City. Go to it. Moses' statements were no small help, Paul Windells recalls. His support of Mayor LaGuardia did more than any other single thing, I think, to give the impression that LaGuardia did mean to give the city an independent administration. Moses' statements were front-paged, while others were buried next to the bra and girdle ads. And their value was further enhanced because newspapers gave their readers the impression that he was speaking not only for himself, but also for someone whose name had even more potent a political force in the city than his. Al Smith had not been able to bring himself to back either of his party's candidates. All during the election campaign, the press pressed the happy warrior for a statement. When it was not forthcoming, reporters drew conclusions from Moses' statements. Pointing out that Moses was one of Al Smith's closest friends, the World Telegram said that his endorsement of LaGuardia has invoked a powerful, if silent, reinforcement to help LaGuardia win. Moses, who was not speaking for Smith, tried to dispel the impression that he was, but LaGuardia's advisors did all they could to foster that impression. When Moses was introduced to the crowd at a climactic fusion rally at Madison Square Garden, the band played The Sidewalks of New York. Before beginning his prepared speech, Moses said, "I have no desire to appear on this platform under false colors, much as I appreciate the implications involved in the instructions to the band. I do not come here as an emissary of my distinguished friend and former chief, who remained in the affections of the people, the first citizen of the city." But at the end of Moses' speech, the band struck up the same tune. I'm going to read another, well, it's kind of like a long paragraph, so it's like pretty much another page. Within a week after the votes were counted, LaGuardia invited Moses to join his administration. Whether he had promised through Ingersoll to do so in order to obtain Moses' support, the making of such a deal might explain Moses' sudden decision to break his silence on the campaign, is unknown. But there were plenty of other explanations for the invitation. Some of the explanations were rooted in personality. Fiorello LaGuardia had an affection for his city. His wife recalls that when, after 12 years of trying, he finally became its mayor, it was like he owned the United States. Nobody should do anything to it. With his romantic temperament, he wanted to beautify the city. He had a grand, if vague, conception of a metropolis whose citizens would pass their daily rounds in surroundings that uplifted the spirit. Too often, he said, life in New York is merely a squalid succession of days, whereas in fact, it can be a great living adventure. Wow, that is I really like that quote a lot because unfortunately, 100 years later, it feels still true. And LaGuardia thought of such beautification primarily in terms of public works. He liked physical accomplishment, recalls Paul J. Kern, LaGuardia's first law secretary at City Hall. He liked to get things built for people. On Sundays, we used to drive around the city trying to think of things that should be built. Yeah, thankfully, it no longer is ever squalid. LaGuardia admired men who built. Lawyers, to lawyer LaGuardia, were bad. He often remarked that a lawyer was like a prostitute. A man hired a prostitute to use her body, and he hired a lawyer to use his brains and knowledge of the law. And wouldn't he say, and he would say, he didn't know, but that, sorry, this is a crazy sentence. And he would say, he didn't know, but that the man who hired the prostitute got the better of the bargain. Engineers were good. Engineers fascinated him, recalls Joseph D. McGoldrick, his comptroller. Lawyers were always getting in his way, telling him things he couldn't do. LaGuardia didn't like people who told him what he couldn't do, but engineers could do things. They got things built for people. Says Kern, he stood like a child in front of the simplest engineering feat. LaGuardia's favorite evening watering hole was the Engineers Club at 32 West 40th Street, where he was an honorary member. Reuben Lazarus, who often watched him sitting in the club bar, listening raptly to the club's non-honorary members talk about their achievements, says, engineers were his gods. And although he hardly knew Moses' achievements especially awed him. He told Windels that he had more than once driven over the Long Island parkways for inspiration. Okay, LaGuardia Moses Lover's Arc. That's how it feels. Other explanations for LaGuardia's invitation to Moses were rooted in politics. LaGuardia had won with only 40% of the vote. He was still a Republican in a Democratic town, a Republican who had been enabled to win largely because Democratic votes had been split between O'Brien and McKee. He could not count on another split or on another fusion-boosting Seabury investigation in 1937. He knew that his political future depended, as one of his biographers had written, on his giving New Yorkers the spectacularly good government that he promised them. Specifically, LaGuardia had promised to staff the city's government with non-political, non-partisan experts. To the public, Robert Moses epitomized the non-political, non-partisan expert. His appointment would prove that LaGuardia was keeping his promise, and his immense popularity could not help rubbing off on the mayor who brought his talents to the city. There were other reasons rooted in politics. LaGuardia feared Al Smith. He well knew that if Smith had been running against him, he would not be mayor. And he knew what would happen if Smith decided to run in 1937, or even to lend his immense prestige to some other candidate who would unify the overwhelming Democratic majority in the city. Making Smith's favorite a part of his administration would do much to keep the happy warrior happy and off the warpath. LaGuardia knew that if he was to produce good government in a bankrupt city, the first requirement was money. You know, he told a reporter earnestly, I'm in the position of an artist or a sculptor. I can see New York as it should be and as it can be, but now I am like the man who has a conception that he wishes to carve or to paint, who has the model before him, but hasn't a chisel or a brush. The only source of money to purchase a chisel or a brush the size LaGuardia had in mind was the federal government. Its president was not of LaGuardia's party. It's FDR, right? 1933. Gotta be. He knew that Moses had enjoyed great success on Long Island in obtaining federal funds, and he did not know of the hatred between Roosevelt and Moses. Furthermore, LaGuardia knew that a key reason for Moses' success in obtaining federal money was that Moses had plans for huge public works ready at the moment the money became available. To get plans, you needed first a large staff of engineers trained in building public works. He knew that the city departments did not have such staffs, and he knew that Moses did. Moses needed LaGuardia if he was to realize his great park and parkway plan for New York City. But LaGuardia also needed Moses. I'm going to end there for now. That was kind of a fun chapter. It's fun to learn more about LaGuardia. I knew like some stuff about him, but I didn't realize that he was so gung-ho on building, or that he was a fanboy of engineers, or that he loved Robert Moses so much, or that he was the first Republican mayor after like 2 decades, maybe even more, of all the Democratic Tammany guys. Well, I guess the John Peroy Mitchell, who was mayor from, I'm looking at my cheat sheet that I wrote, he was mayor from 1914 to 17. He was the boy mayor, and he was the highly educated Republican, not seemingly very corrupt guy. But then after that, it was like Red Mike Hyland and Jimmy Walker, who were both really kind of sleazy. Okay, I hope you have a good rest of your Friday. See you later. Thanks for tuning in. Can I upload the cheat sheet? Oh man, I don't even know where to upload it. My handwriting is really bad. Also, it's probably backwards. Wait, no, it's not. You can, okay, you can read this if you want to, but it's like very, I think you're probably better off just looking at the Wikipedia articles for the different New York City mayors instead of trying to read my messy handwriting. But see you later.